From the beginning of time, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob set apart a people, chosen not by man but by covenant. The world has tried to erase their name, to scatter them across the nations, to bury their identity beneath slavery, exile, and chains. Yet the word declares that the lost tribes shall be found, and the scattered shall be gathered. For the 12 tribes of Israel were not forgotten. They were hidden, preserved in mystery, until the appointed time of revelation. Look to the nations, to the islands, to the coastlands, to the lands of Africa and beyond. See a people who endured the yoke of oppression, who sang songs of Zion in a foreign land, who remembered Jerusalem though they had never seen it with their eyes. A people carried on ships, just as the prophecy foretold, marked by covenant blood, though the world called them cursed. Yet the curse was never their destiny, the blessing was. For the tribes of Israel were written into eternity, their names engraved on the gates of the New Jerusalem. Ephraim, Judah, Levi, Benjamin, their blood flows still, their spirit rises still. The enemy tried to break them, but could not destroy what God himself established. For though the world sees slaves, the heavens see kings. Though the earth sees outcasts, the throne sees heirs. Though man tried to erase them, prophecy declares their return. The truth is being unveiled. The veil is lifting. The 12 tribes of black Israelites are rising from the dust of history, rising from the corners of the earth, rising in the knowledge of who they are and whose they are. For in these last days, God is awakening his people to call them by name, to restore their identity, and to prepare them for his coming glory. When the prophets of old lifted their voices, they spoke not only of blessings but of warnings, not only of promises but of judgments. They declared that obedience would bring life, prosperity, and peace, but rebellion would bring scattering, exile, and sorrow. The covenant was not only about being chosen, it was also about being accountable. And the history of the 12 tribes reveals this mystery. Prophecy foretold their scattering. It was written long before it happened, inscribed in the Torah, echoed by the prophets, and fulfilled in the unfolding of time. Moses, before he departed from the people, stood before Israel and warned them of what would come. He said, "If you do not obey the Lord your God and carefully follow his commands, then all these curses will come upon you." He spoke of famine, of enemies, of devastation. He spoke of them being torn from their land and scattered among the nations. He declared that they would be carried on ships to a land they had not known, where they would be sold as slaves. These were not the words of man, but the words of the Spirit, and in history it came to pass. The Assyrian Empire rose with cruelty and power, sweeping across the northern kingdom of Israel, taking away the 10 tribes, dispersing them into the nations. It was not random conquest. It was fulfillment of prophecy. Hosea spoke of it when he said, "You are not my people," yet promised that one day they would again be called sons of the living God. The scattering was discipline, but not destruction. It was exile, but not erasure. The tribes were sent out, hidden in foreign lands, their identity buried under the weight of exile. But every step was already foretold. Then came Babylon, rising like a lion, devouring the southern kingdom of Judah. Jerusalem was burned, the temple destroyed, the people taken into captivity. Jeremiah wept over the ruins and spoke of the 70 years of exile, but also of a return. He declared that though the people were scattered, God would bring them back, for the scattering was never meant to be the end. It was a chapter, a consequence of disobedience, yet even within the curse was a seed of hope. The scattering was written, but so too was the gathering. Yet the prophecy did not end with Babylon. It extended far into the future. Moses spoke of a scattering that would reach from one end of the earth to the other. He spoke of Israel serving other gods made of wood and stone. He spoke of them being oppressed in every land, their lives hanging in doubt, their children taken from them. These words painted a picture not only of ancient exile, but of later history. They spoke of a transatlantic passage, of ships of bondage, of chains, of a people stripped of their language, their names, their heritage, their dignity. They spoke of sorrow sung in the fields of captivity, of cries rising from the islands and the Americas. The prophecy of Deuteronomy 28 was not only for the ancient world, it unfolded again in modern times. It was the word made history, the warning become reality. A people chosen by covenant were scattered across continents, taken into lands that neither they nor their fathers had known. They were treated as strangers, rejected, enslaved, despised. Yet in all of this, the hand of prophecy was visible. Nothing happened outside of what had been declared. Nothing came as a surprise to the one who sees the end from the beginning. The scattering was also foretold by Isaiah, who said the people would be plucked up from their land and scattered into all nations. Amos declared that God would sift Israel among all peoples like grain shaken in a sieve, yet not a kernel would fall to the ground. That is the mystery, scattered but preserved, lost to the eyes of the world, but never lost to God, hidden among nations, yet marked by covenant blood. Why did prophecy foretell such a scattering? Because God's people had a calling not only to dwell in the land of Israel, but to be a light to the nations. Even in judgment, the hand of God was weaving redemption. Though they were scattered because of disobedience, their presence in the nations prepared the way for a greater plan. For from them would come voices of faith, songs of hope, testimonies of endurance. Even in chains, they carried the story of Israel. Even in oppression, they bore witness to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The scattering was written to remind the world of the seriousness of covenant. God's word is not casual. When he says blessing will follow obedience, it does. When he says curse will follow rebellion, it does. Israel's history stands as living proof of this truth. The scattering is a warning not only to Israel, but to all nations. If God's chosen people could be disciplined for turning away, then no nation is beyond accountability. Yet it is also a message of hope. If God would not utterly destroy his covenant people, then his mercy is greater than judgment. In every nation where the tribes were scattered, prophecy followed them. In Africa, in the islands, in the Americas, in Europe, echoes of the covenant remained. Though enslaved, they cried out like their ancestors in Egypt. Though oppressed, they carried the rhythms of Zion in their songs. Though stripped of identity, the Spirit of God bore witness in their hearts. The prophecy said they would be strangers in a land not their own, and so they were. But prophecy also declared that the scattered would one day be gathered, the forgotten would be remembered, and the hidden would be revealed. Look at the words of Ezekiel. He saw two sticks, one for Judah and one for Ephraim, brought together in the hand of God. He was told that though the tribes were divided and scattered, God himself would reunite them. This has not yet fully come to pass, but it is beginning. The awakening of identity, the uncovering of truth, the recognition of heritage, it is the stirring of prophecy. The scattered are hearing their name again. The dry bones are rattling once more. Jesus himself spoke of this when he said he came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He knew that the tribes had been scattered, hidden among the nations. His mission was not only to redeem, but to seek and to save that which was lost. His words pointed to a gathering that would span the ends of the earth. He said that angels would be sent out to gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. The scattering was prophecy, but so too is the gathering. The scattering reveals both the justice and the mercy of God. Justice because sin brought consequence. Mercy because even in exile, he preserved a remnant. The scattering fulfilled the warnings of Moses, but it also set the stage for the promises of restoration. Every ship that carried the children of Israel into slavery, every exile into foreign lands, every dispersion into the nations was written beforehand. And if the scattering was so perfectly fulfilled, then how much more will the gathering be fulfilled? If the curses of the covenant came to pass, then surely the blessings will also come to pass. Prophecy declared that Israel would be a proverb and a byword among nations. History shows this to be true. Mocked, ridiculed, slandered, despised, they bore the weight of those words. Yet prophecy also declared that they would not be utterly destroyed, that even in the farthest lands, God would remember them, that he would call them back by name, that though the world would see them as nothing, he would see them as his treasured possession. The scattering teaches us that God's word is unshakable. Every detail spoken by Moses, every vision of the prophets, every word of warning came to pass. And if the scattering was foretold and fulfilled, then we can be certain that the restoration will also be fulfilled. For the covenant is not broken. The people are not forgotten. The tribes are not lost. They are hidden, preserved, awaiting the appointed time of gathering. The scattering is part of the great mystery of redemption. For through their dispersion, the knowledge of the God of Israel reached the nations. Through their exile, the stage was set for the Messiah to come, for the gospel to spread to every corner of the earth. Even in judgment, God's plan for salvation was at work. Even in scattering, his hand was moving toward gathering. The history of the 12 tribes is not random. It is prophecy walking in time. It is the word becoming history, the warnings becoming reality. And just as surely as the scattering was fulfilled, so too will the restoration come. The scattered will be gathered. The hidden will be revealed. The forgotten will be remembered. For prophecy does not fail, and the covenant does not end. When the world looked upon the children of Israel in their scattering, it saw only weakness, poverty, and defeat. When empires looked upon them, they saw a people to be conquered, enslaved, and erased. When nations looked upon them, they saw outcasts and strangers. When men of power wrote their histories, they wrote them as a people broken, forgotten, and insignificant, yet heaven never saw them that way. For the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob never looked upon his covenant people through the eyes of man. The world saw slaves, but God saw kings. The earth saw outcasts, but the throne saw heirs. Humanity judged them by chains and exile, but eternity judged them by covenant and promise. The mystery of Israel is that identity in God is never determined by the labels of men. Joseph was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. To the eyes of the Egyptians, he was just another Hebrew slave, another prisoner. But to the eyes of God, he was a ruler in training, a deliverer of nations, a man destined to sit at the right hand of Pharaoh and save his people from famine. The world saw chains, but God saw a crown. And so it has always been with the tribes. When Judah was carried away into Babylon, they were mocked by their captors. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. They hung their harps on the willows and wept. Their captors saw a defeated people, a nation crushed, a temple destroyed, a heritage stripped away. But heaven saw something different. Heaven saw a people refined by fire, disciplined for a season, yet still chosen, still beloved, still heirs of the covenant. For the throne of David had been promised to endure forever, and from Judah would come forth the Messiah, the King of Kings. Even in their lowest place, heaven saw their royal destiny. The same was true in the scattering across the earth. When ships carried the children of Israel in chains across the seas, the world saw nothing but cargo, merchandise, human lives reduced to property. To the traitors and oppressors, they were nameless, faceless, broken. But heaven did not see merchandise. It saw a royal priesthood. Heaven did not see slaves. It saw kings and priests destined to reign with Messiah. Heaven did not see nameless captives. It saw names engraved on the gates of the New Jerusalem. The psalmist declared, "You are God's, and all of you are children of the Most High." Yet he also said, "You shall die like men and fall like one of the princes." Why? Because the children of Israel forgot who they were. They believed what the world told them, that they were weak, broken, insignificant. And when they forgot, they fell. But even in their fall, their true identity never died. It was hidden, buried beneath oppression, but it remained. The blood of kings still flowed in their veins. The covenant of priests still rested upon their calling. The inheritance of eternity was still theirs. The world has always measured worth by power, wealth, and strength. But God measures by covenant, by calling, by promise. David was a shepherd boy, overlooked by his father, despised by his brothers. To men, he was the least. To God, he was a king. Gideon hid in fear, threshing wheat in secret. To himself, he was the weakest in his family, the least in his tribe. But the angel of the Lord called him a mighty warrior. The world saw nothing in them, but heaven saw greatness. The same is true for the scattered tribes. The world saw only suffering, but heaven saw destiny. The scattering itself revealed this mystery. A king is not defined by his throne, nor an heir by his inheritance alone. A true king is defined by who he is, not by what he has. Israel was stripped of land, throne, temple, and crown, yet their identity remained. The covenant could not be removed by chains. The promises could not be broken by exile. The calling could not be canceled by oppression. Even when the world treated them as the lowest of the low, God saw them as the highest of the high. This truth is written in prophecy in Deuteronomy. After all the curses of exile and scattering, God declared, "Yet I will not forget the covenant I made with your fathers." Jeremiah declared, "I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Isaiah declared, "Instead of your shame you shall have double honor, and instead of confusion they shall rejoice in their portion. Therefore in their land they shall possess double, everlasting joy shall be theirs." Every word reveals the same reality. Though the world sees slaves, heaven sees kings. Even the Messiah himself was treated as nothing. Isaiah prophesied of him, "He was despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. We hid our faces from him. He was despised and we esteemed him not. To the Romans, he was just another Jewish man executed on a cross. To the priests, he was a blasphemer. To the crowds, he was a failed prophet. But to heaven, he was the King of glory, the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world, the Redeemer of all creation. And if the Messiah himself was treated as nothing while being everything, then so too his people would bear the same contradiction. This is why Paul wrote, "If we suffer with him, we shall also reign with him." The suffering of the tribes, the humiliation, the chains, the rejection, none of it defined their true identity. In fact, it testified to it. For the world does not enslave kings unless it fears their authority. The enemy does not oppress a people unless it knows their destiny. The darkness does not attack unless the light threatens to rise. The very fact that Israel was scattered, enslaved, and oppressed is proof of their calling. The greater the attack, the greater the destiny. The deeper the humiliation, the higher the honor that awaits. The world saw only the outward, but God saw the inward. Men looked at Joseph and saw a slave, but God saw a ruler. Men looked at Moses and saw a fugitive shepherd, but God saw a deliverer of nations. Men looked at Esther and saw an orphan in exile, but God saw a queen who would save her people. Men looked at Daniel and saw a captive in Babylon, but God saw a prophet who would speak of kingdoms and the end of days. Over and over, the world saw nothing, but God saw greatness. And so it has been with the 12 tribes. The chains that bound them did not define them. The covenant did. The nations that despised them did not define them. The promise did. The rejection they suffered did not define them. Their destiny did. For they were never what the world said they were. They were always what God declared them to be: a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people set apart. They were heirs of Abraham, carriers of the covenant, witnesses of the truth. The world may have stripped them of titles, but it could never strip them of identity. This truth is rising again in the awakening of identity. As the scattered tribes begin to remember who they are, they realize they were never slaves in the eyes of heaven. They were kings in disguise, heirs in exile, royalty hidden in rags. The enemy called them cursed, but God calls them blessed. The nations called them lost, but God calls them found. History called them forgotten, but eternity calls them chosen. And when this realization comes, everything changes. For when a slave realizes he is a king, he no longer walks in chains, even if the chains remain on his hands. When an outcast realizes he is an heir, he no longer lives as a beggar, even if he is still in a foreign land. When the forgotten realize they are chosen, they no longer live as though their lives have no meaning, for they know they carry destiny within them. This is why prophecy declares that Israel will rise. Not because the world gives them power, not because nations grant them recognition, but because God has declared it. The same God who took Joseph from the pit to the palace, who took David from the fields to the throne, who took Esther from obscurity to royalty, will take his scattered people from oppression to glory. For the world may see slaves, but heaven sees kings. The earth may see the rejected, but the throne sees heirs. The nations may see nothing, but eternity sees everything. The identity of Israel has always been hidden beneath the contradictions of life. Poor in the eyes of men, but rich in faith. Weak in the sight of nations, but strong in covenant. Rejected in the courts of kings, but exalted in the throne of heaven. Their destiny is written not in the books of history, but in the Word of God. And that Word declares they are chosen, royal, beloved, heirs, and destined to reign. The world has always misjudged God's people because it looks only on the outside. But God looks at the heart. The same way He chose a shepherd boy to be king, a fisherman to be an apostle, a persecutor to be a preacher, He chose a scattered people to be the carriers of His covenant. And while the world has mocked, oppressed, and despised them, heaven has prepared crowns, thrones, and glory. For the world saw slaves, but God saw kings. The world saw exiles, but God saw heirs. The world saw nothing, but God saw everything. For centuries the truth lay hidden, veiled by time, buried under the weight of exile and oppression. The children of Israel were scattered into every nation, taken from their land, stripped of their language, robbed of their names. Generations passed, and the memory of who they were faded from the earth. To the world they were forgotten. To history they were erased. To the empires they were nothing more than slaves, colonized peoples, exiles without identity. Yet heaven never lost sight of them. Their names were engraved in the palms of God's hands. Their destiny was written in the eternal covenant. Their identity was never destroyed, only hidden, waiting for the time when it would be revealed again. And now in these last days, the veil is lifting, the hidden is being uncovered, the identity of the 12 tribes is being restored. The prophet spoke of this unveiling. Hosea declared, in the place where it was said, "You are not my people, there they will be called the sons of the living God." That word points to a mystery. In the very lands where the tribes were told they were nothing, in the very nations where their names were erased, there the truth would be revealed. The revelation would not come by the will of man, but by the Spirit of God. For the Spirit is the one who awakens what has long been asleep, who opens the eyes of the blind, who calls the dead to life. Just as Ezekiel saw the valley of dry bones rise again, so the scattered tribes are rising as the breath of God enters them once more. For centuries, the identity of Israel was covered in silence. Those who enslaved them told them they were cursed, told them they were heathens, told them they were forgotten by God. Their heritage was rewritten, their history twisted, their legacy stolen. The conquerors painted them with lies, and generation after generation grew up believing those lies. Yet prophecy never lies, the word of God cannot be erased, and though man tried to hide the truth, God preserved it in songs, in stories, in bloodlines, in the whispers of the Spirit. Even in the fields of captivity, their voices sang of Zion. They remembered Jerusalem, though they had never seen it. They longed for a land that was not theirs in this life, but was engraved in their spirit. How could this be unless it was the echo of covenant memory? Even when all outward knowledge was stripped away, inwardly the identity remained. For covenant is not merely taught, it is imprinted. Though the world tried to erase them, heaven refused to let them forget forever. Now the truth is being unveiled. The veil of lies is being torn away. The scattered tribes are awakening to the knowledge of who they are and whose they are. They are realizing that they are not forsaken, not cursed, not forgotten. They are the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are the seed of the covenant. They are the ones through whom prophecy flows and history turns. The awakening is not a work of man's power, for no historian or scholar could have orchestrated it. It is the hand of God moving in time, stirring the spirits of his people, reminding them of their true identity. Isaiah prophesied, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples, but the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you." That word was spoken to Israel, scattered and weary, yet destined for restoration. And now that word is alive again. For centuries, darkness covered the truth, but now the light is breaking forth. The revelation is dawning. The scattered tribes are beginning to shine, not by their own strength, but by the glory of the one who called them. The unveiling of identity is a sign of the times. For just as the scattering was written in prophecy, so too is the gathering. Just as the exile was declared, so too was the restoration. The revelation of the tribes is not an accident, not a coincidence, but a fulfillment. Jeremiah declared that in the last days, God would make a new covenant with the house of Israel and Judah. He promised that he would write his law upon their hearts, and they would know him from the least to the greatest. For them to know him, they must first know who they are. And so the unveiling is the preparation for the greater promise. The enemy has always feared this revelation, for if a people believe they are slaves, they will live as slaves. If they believe they are nothing, they will accept nothing. If they believe they are cursed, they will remain in despair. But once they realize they are chosen, once they remember they are kings, once they awaken to the truth that they are heirs of the covenant, then chains begin to break. Oppression begins to lose its grip. The lies of history begin to crumble. For truth sets free and revelation transforms everything. This is why the unveiling is resisted. The nations fear what will happen when Israel awakens. History fears what will be exposed when the lies are overturned. Powers tremble at the thought of a people rising who know their true heritage, who walk not as beggars but as heirs, not as captives but as kings. The revelation of identity threatens the very systems built on their oppression. Yet prophecy declares that it cannot be stopped. What God has ordained cannot be silenced. The hidden must be revealed, the scattered must be gathered, the forgotten must be remembered. The unveiling is also personal. It is not only about nations and tribes, but about individuals. Every man, woman, and child among the scattered is hearing a call within their spirit. A whisper that says, "You are more than what the world has told you. You are more than what history has written about you. You are not cursed. You are chosen. You are not forgotten. You are remembered. You are not worthless. You are priceless. That inner call is the Spirit testifying to their true identity. And when that whisper becomes a roar, the awakening turns into a movement, and the movement becomes a restoration. Consider again Ezekiel's vision. The bones were scattered across the valley lifeless, dry, forgotten. To human eyes there was no hope, but God asked, "Son of man, can these bones live?" And Ezekiel said, "Lord, you know." Then God commanded him to prophesy. He spoke to the bones, and they began to rattle. They came together, bone to bone, flesh came upon them, breath entered them, and they stood as an exceedingly great army. That is the picture of the unveiling. The scattered tribes, long forgotten, long buried under lies, are now rising. The bones are rattling, the breath is entering, and an army of truth is standing once more. The unveiling is not only about identity, but about destiny. For if the tribes know who they are, they will also know what they are called to do. They are called to be a light to the nations, a testimony to the world, a people through whom God reveals his glory. They are called to walk in holiness, in covenant, in truth. They are called to prepare for the coming kingdom. The unveiling is not the end, it is the beginning. It is the preparation for restoration, the foundation for revival, the sign of redemption. The nations will be forced to see what they once despised. Those who mocked will see glory. Those who enslaved will see freedom. Those who rejected will see honor. For prophecy declares that kings shall come to their light, and nations to the brightness of their rising. The unveiling will turn shame into honor, rejection into acceptance, curses into blessings. For what God is revealing cannot be hidden again. Once the light is dawned, darkness cannot cover it. Once the truth has risen, lies cannot bury it. This is why the unveiling of the 12 tribes is shocking to the world. It overturns history. It contradicts the narratives of empires. It exposes the lies of conquerors. It declares that those called the least are in fact the greatest, that those despised are in fact beloved, that those enslaved are in fact kings. The unveiling shakes the foundations of what the world thought it knew. It reveals that history was written by men, but destiny was written by God, and what God wrote cannot be erased. Now, as this truth spreads, as the tribes awaken, as the veil lifts, the world will see what heaven has always seen. The 12 tribes, hidden but not lost, forgotten by men, but remembered by God, will rise in their true identity. They will no longer live as slaves to lies, but as heirs of promise. They will no longer see themselves as rejected, but as chosen. They will no longer walk in darkness, but in light. The unveiling is here, and the truth is being revealed. From the beginning of the covenant, the call of God upon his people was never only about the past, it was always about the future. The 12 tribes were chosen not only to inherit a land, but to fulfill a destiny. They were called not only to bear the covenant, but to carry it forward into every generation. Even in scattering, even in exile, even in chains, that call has never been removed. And now, in these days, the same voice that spoke to Abraham, the same word that thundered at Sinai, the same Spirit that breathed through the prophets is calling his people once again. It is a call to rise, to awaken, to remember who they are, and to prepare for what is coming. For centuries, the children of Israel were brought low. Their strength was broken, their names erased, their heritage stolen. They were told they were cursed, told they were forgotten, told they were nothing. Yet the truth of prophecy was never that they would end in shame. It was that they would be restored in glory. The scattering was written, but so was the gathering. The exile was declared, but so was the return. The curse was spoken, but so was the blessing. And if the scattering was fulfilled, so too will the gathering be fulfilled. The call to rise is not a dream. It is the appointed destiny. Jeremiah spoke of this when he declared, "The days are coming, says the Lord, when I will restore the fortunes of my people Israel and Judah, and I will bring them back to the land I gave to their ancestors." Isaiah proclaimed, "Awake, awake. Put on your strength, O Zion. Put on your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem." Ezekiel prophesied of the dry bones rising into an army. Hosea declared that those who were called, "not my people," would again be called, "children of the living God." Every prophet looked beyond the scattering and saw a rising. Every prophet declared that the low place would give way to the high place, that the shame would give way to honor, that the captivity would give way to freedom. This is why the tribes must prepare, for restoration is not only about identity, it is about readiness. A people who know who they are but do not rise will miss the fullness of their destiny. A people who remember their heritage but do not prepare for their calling will remain asleep in the midst of revelation. The call of God is not simply to know, it is to act, to rise, to walk in the covenant. The awakening of identity must lead to the awakening of destiny. The preparation is both spiritual and practical. Spiritually, the call is to holiness, to return to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob with pure hearts and obedient lives. For it was disobedience that led to scattering, and it will be obedience that leads to restoration. Spiritually, the call is to prayer, to seek his face, to walk in his ways. For the nations of the earth will not be changed by politics or power, but by the presence of God moving through his chosen people. Spiritually, the call is to faith, to believe the promises even when the world denies them, to hold on to hope even when circumstances seem impossible. But the preparation is also practical. To rise means to reclaim dignity, to walk in wisdom, to teach the next generation the truth of who they are. To rise means to break free from the lies of history, to rebuild families, to restore communities, to live as kings and priests even while the world still calls them slaves and outcasts. To rise means to prepare for leadership, for the covenant was always about a people set apart to lead nations into the knowledge of the true God. The awakening is not just about memory, it is about mission. The prophet spoke of a future when the nations would see the glory of God upon Israel. Isaiah said, "Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising." That word speaks of more than identity, it speaks of purpose. The scattered tribes were not chosen only for themselves, they were chosen for the world. Their restoration is not only for their sake, it is for the sake of the nations. When Israel rises, the nations will see the light of God. When Israel awakens, the world will know the truth. When Israel prepares, the kingdom will come closer. This is why the enemy has always fought so fiercely against their awakening. For if they remain asleep, the nations remain in darkness. If they remain broken, the nations remain deceived. If they remain scattered, the kingdom's witness remains hidden. But once they rise, the lies collapse. Once they prepare, the enemy trembles. Once they awaken, prophecy moves into fulfillment. The enemy fears their destiny, because their destiny is to stand as living proof of the faithfulness of God, to show the world that his promises never fail, that his covenant never ends, that his word is unshakable. The call to prepare is urgent. For the days are moving quickly, the signs are multiplying, the prophecies are unfolding before our eyes. The world is in upheaval, nations are in confusion, and darkness covers the earth. Yet in this very hour, the Spirit is calling the tribes to rise. To walk no longer as those who are forgotten, but as those who are remembered. To live no longer as those who are cursed, but as those who are blessed. To think no longer as those who are slaves, but as those who are heirs. For the time is short and the kingdom is near. This call is not about pride of blood or flesh. It is not about boasting in heritage or despising others. It is about covenant, about purpose, about destiny. It is about remembering that the God of Israel chose them for a mission, and that mission has not ended. It is about realizing that the scattering was never the end of the story. It is about preparing for the final chapters, when the tribes will stand together again, when the two sticks will be one in the hand of God, when the promises spoken by the prophets will be fulfilled. The preparation means rejecting the lies that have bound them for generations. Lies that said they were forgotten. Lies that said they were cursed forever. Lies that said their suffering was the end. The truth is greater. The truth is that they were hidden, not lost. Preserved, not destroyed. Chosen, not forsaken. The preparation means walking in that truth, living as though it is already fulfilled, because prophecy is as certain as history once it is spoken by the mouth of God. The preparation also means unity, for the tribes have been divided, not only by nations but by strife, by misunderstanding, by separation. Yet prophecy declares they will be one again. Ephraim and Judah, north and south, scattered and gathered, they will come together as one people. Division was part of the judgment, unity will be part of the restoration. The call to prepare is a call to heal, to reconcile, to come together under the covenant once more. Every generation has had a part in this story. Those who wept in Babylon prepared the way for those who returned under Ezra. Those who suffered in the exile prepared the way for those who rebuilt Jerusalem. Those who endured slavery prepared the way for those who would awaken in freedom. Now, this generation is called to prepare the way for restoration, to carry the truth forward, to teach the children who they are, to build upon the foundations of those who came before, to rise not only for themselves but for the generations to come. The call to rise and prepare is also a call to courage. For when the tribes awaken, opposition will come. The world will resist, the nations will deny, the enemy will rage. But courage is the mark of those who are chosen. Joshua was told, "Be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." The same command stands today. Courage to stand against lies. Courage to live in truth. Courage to embrace identity. Courage to walk into destiny. The rising of the tribes is not an isolated event. It is part of the great plan of redemption. For through their restoration, the nations will see the faithfulness of God. Through their awakening, the world will witness the power of prophecy fulfilled. Through their preparation, the kingdom of God will advance. And when the tribes stand in their true identity, they will not only reclaim what was lost, but reveal what was always intended. That the people of God are called to be a light to the nations, a witness to the world, and a sign of the coming kingdom. So the call is clear, the time is now. The voice of the Spirit is sounding, rise, awaken, prepare, rise from the dust of exile. Awaken from the lies of history. Prepare for the glory that is coming. For the scattered tribes are not forsaken. They are chosen. They are called. They are heirs of the covenant. And their rising will shake the nations, reveal the truth, and declare to the world that the God of Israel is faithful and his word endures forever. From the very beginning of Scripture, from the first moments that God called a man named Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldees, there has been a covenant written not in ink, not on stone, but in eternity itself. The covenant was spoken, breathed, and sealed by the Almighty. Out of Abram came Isaac, and out of Isaac came Jacob, and out of Jacob came 12 sons. Those 12 sons became 12 tribes, and those 12 tribes became the very nation of Israel, a people set apart wholly unto God, chosen not for their strength, not for their numbers, but for the purpose of God himself. The promise was eternal. And if it was eternal, then it could never be erased. Nations could fall, empires could crumble, enemies could rise, kings could oppress, armies could scatter them to the ends of the earth. But the covenant could never die, for the 12 tribes were never forgotten. When Assyria rose with power and might, they took away the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes of Israel, scattering them into the nations. History would tell you they vanished. Scholars would call them lost. But how can what God himself has named be lost? When Babylon rose and carried away Judah into captivity, the world declared the end of Israel's story. Yet in the Word, God spoke again and again that though he would scatter, he would also gather. Though he would discipline, he would also restore. For the covenant is not like the agreements of men. Men may forget, but God cannot forget. Men may forsake, but God cannot forsake. Even when Israel was faithless, the covenant was faithful. The 12 tribes were scattered across the earth. Some were taken north, some east, some south, some west. They were hidden among the nations, clothed in foreign garments, speaking foreign tongues, bearing foreign names. Yet inside of them, in their very blood, in their very identity, the covenant lived on. For God said to Abraham, "Your seed shall be as the stars of heaven and as the sand on the seashore." Do you think a promise that vast, that eternal, could ever disappear? Even in the exile, even in the ships of bondage, even in the chains of slavery, the covenant could not be destroyed. The story of the tribes is the story of a people who were brought low but never erased. They were despised and rejected of men, yet precious in the eyes of God. They were enslaved, yet destined for freedom. They were stripped of their names, yet their true names were written in heaven. They were scattered across Africa, carried to the islands of the Caribbean, driven into the Americas, hidden in the nations of Europe, Asia, and beyond. The world forgot them, but God never did. For he said, "Though I make a full end of all nations where I have scattered you, yet I will not make a full end of you." Even when history erased their memory, even when the conquerors wrote their books and said they were no more, prophecy stood as a witness. The 12 tribes were not destroyed, they were preserved. Like seeds planted deep in the ground, they were hidden for an appointed time. And seeds that are hidden do not remain hidden forever. Seeds break forth, sprout, rise, and reveal what was sound from the beginning. The identity of the 12 tribes is now rising again. Consider the songs sung in the fields of captivity, songs of Zion, songs of rivers, songs of deliverance. How could a people who had never seen Jerusalem sing of Jerusalem? How could they long for Zion if Zion was never in their blood? Deep in their spirit, the memory of covenant remained. Even though stripped of outward identity, Inwardly, the covenant was engraved. The God who promised Abraham that his seed would be a blessing to all nations could never allow those tribes to be erased. They would be preserved through exile, through bondage, through scattering, through rejection. Every lash of the whip, every chain of iron, every tear in the night was seen by heaven. And heaven declared, "These are my people. They may be crushed, but they cannot be destroyed. They may be scattered, but they cannot be lost. They may be called by other names, but I know their true names." For the names of the 12 tribes are not merely earthly labels, they are prophetic identities. Levi means joined. Ephraim means fruitful. These names were not only for the past, they are eternal realities. And as long as the covenant lives, those names remain written. The world looked upon them and said, "They are forsaken." But the word of God says, "Can a mother forget her nursing child? Even if she could forget, I will not forget you. Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands." The 12 tribes are engraved on the very hands of God. They are the foundation stones of the New Jerusalem. They are the witnesses of the covenant. They are the chosen people through whom the Messiah himself came into the world. How could they ever be forgotten? The history of the tribes is a testimony that no matter how far a people fall, no matter how scattered they become, God's promise remains. The enemy sought to erase them. Empires sought to crush them. Colonizers sought to strip them of their identity. Yet in every generation, a remnant remained. In every land, God preserved a spark, a seed, a witness to the covenant. And now in these days, the hidden is being revealed. That which was buried is being uncovered. That which was scattered is being gathered. The truth that was suppressed is breaking forth. Look at the prophecy of Ezekiel, who saw a valley of dry bones, bones without flesh, scattered and forgotten. But when the word of the Lord was spoken, the bones came together, flesh came upon them, breath entered them, and they stood as an exceedingly great army. That vision was not only for Israel of old, but for the tribes scattered through the nations. For centuries they were like dry bones, forgotten by the world, but not by God. And now the breath of God is moving again. The identity is returning. The awakening has begun. Think of Hosea, where God declares, "You are not my people," but then promises, in the place where it was said, "You are not my people," there it will be said, "You are sons of the living God." This is the mystery of the 12 tribes. In the lands where they were told they were nothing, in the places where their heritage was stripped away, their God himself will speak and say, "You are mine. You are Israel. You are the children of the covenant." The 12 tribes were never forgotten. When Joseph was cast into a pit, sold into slavery, and carried to Egypt, it looked as if his life was destroyed. Yet God had not forgotten him. He was preserving him for a greater purpose. So it has been with the tribes. What looked like abandonment was preservation. What looked like loss was actually the stage for restoration. What looked like defeat was the setup for victory. For the covenant could never be broken. Even in the silence of centuries, when no prophet spoke and no temple stood, God was still watching over his people. Even when the nations mocked them, saying, "Where is their God?" Heaven was holding the promise. Even when their names were erased, when they were given new tongues, when their children were taught lies about who they were, God's Spirit bore witness that they were his. And in the appointed time, the truth would come forth. The 12 tribes stand as a testimony to the faithfulness of God. They remind the world that no matter what darkness may attempt, the light of God will prevail. They remind the nations that the purposes of God cannot be thwarted. They remind the oppressed that they are not forgotten. They remind the scattered that they will be gathered. They remind the broken that their restoration is certain. The covenant is eternal, and the covenant people are eternal. For God is not a man that he should lie, nor the son of man that he should change his mind. What he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is still alive today. The 12 tribes were never erased from his sight, never lost from his hand, never removed from his plan. The world may call them lost, but in heaven they have always been found. The nations may forget them, but the covenant remembers. And if the covenant remembers,